Donald Trump has always believed in going for the biggest possible deal, but his ambition for Israel and Gaza remains quite astonishing. He says he's creating no less than eternal peace in the Middle East. Last night, Israel agreed to Trump's 20-point plan, or basically agreed, or we think agreed to Trump's 20-point plan, which would begin with the immediate end to military operations, bring the Israeli hostages back, and help Gaza to rebuild. But will Hamas agree to it? Here's what the president said at the White House.
But I hope that we're going to have a deal for peace. And if Hamas rejects the deal, which is always possible, they're the only one left. Everyone else has accepted it. But I have a feeling that we're going to have a positive answer. But if not, as you know, Bibi, you'd have our full backing.
Full backing to continue the war on Hamas. Whether that war is actually prosecutable to an absolute point of Hamas destruction remains an open question. This is what Benjamin Netanyahu, Bibi, as Trump calls him, said in response.
But if Hamas rejects your plan, Mr. President, or if they supposedly accept it and then basically do everything to counter it, then Israel will finish the job by itself. This can be done the easy way, or it can be done the hard way, but it will be done.
That's Netanyahu there. The Times Middle East correspondent is Samer Al-Atrush. Samer, morning to you.
Good morning.
How plausible does this feel, some 12 or 15 hours after it was announced?
Well, I mean, obviously this is going to be a very as envisaged, and I think in the plan, this is going to be a very long-term plan. It's more of a roadmap with steps and conditions that need to be taken. So even if Hamas were to agree, and I think there's still, the initial messaging has been a bit strident. They haven't put out anything official, but we've seen some initial statements from their members to the media that. For instance, the plan doesn't mention a Palestinian state. I think it appears to have been watered down to coexistence. Obviously, there's the issue of disarming as well, which they have opposed in the past. But there's a lot of pressure coming on them right now from Qatar and other countries to accept this. And so even if they were to accept this, and we do see a ceasefire taking place, and then the hostages released, although I'm not sure the time frame given for their release is very realistic. I think they're scattered around, and whether Hamas has the logistics to gather them all up and the bodies of the deceased hostages and deliver them that time frame, that's another question. But then there are many steps, and I think this allows both Hamas and Benjamin Netanyahu's government ample room to maneuver out of it, and obviously blame the other side. On the one hand, you have Hamas, who have every intention of staying in power, and in reality, they're the only Palestinian faction on the ground right now that can call the shots.
Yeah.
And so to willingly disarm, kind of fall on their swords, and really listen to the voices from Gaza and elsewhere in the region, fall on your swords, get out of Gaza, your leadership. I think that's a bit of a stretch. On the other hand, you have Benjamin Netanyahu's government, which has absolutely, as they make very, very clear, it's not a matter of analysis. They make it very clear. They have absolutely no intention of ever allowing a Palestinian state. They have no intention of really withdrawing from Gaza. They would at least want to keep parts of Gaza as a buffer zone. You have a growing momentum, really, in his hardline government for settling Gaza. They're still very wedded to the idea of, quote unquote, encouraging people in Gaza to leave. So neither side really, I think, will have any intention of really seeing this through.
So why is this happening? Because I totally agree with that. In order for this to happen, two sides will both have to effectively saw off the branch they're sitting on. Because if Netanyahu concedes even the roadmap towards a Palestinian state, his coalition collapses, he's out of government and presumably into prison. And Hamas would have to say, well, for the greater good of the Gazans, we're willing to no longer exist. Neither one of those things just sounds like that could ever happen.
No. I mean, and at the same time, you just have to, you have to look at the history, right? I mean, it's almost 20 years now. It's almost 20 years now or 30 years, sorry, now to to the date of Yitzhak Rabin's assassination after he signed the Oslo Accords with the Palestinians. His assassination by a right-wing zealot, Israeli zealot, came after incitement from Netanyahu, who was the leader of the opposition at the time, and other right-wing members, opposition members. And it also came after Hamas had launched a campaign of suicide bombings in Israel, which really soured the opinion in Israel. And a few months later, Netanyahu became prime minister. And as he later acknowledged, and as he reminded us last week, he worked very hard to foil the Oslo Accords and make sure that there was no Palestinian state. And we have the exact same players right now. You have Netanyahu on the one hand, you have Hamas on the other hand. Both are veterans of foiling sort of these type of roadmaps. And the stakes are much, much higher now. And I think both sides view themselves at the end game. For Netanyahu, this is a moment where you forever delete the idea of a Palestinian state. You change.
But how do you do that, Sam? I'm so interested you say that, because I misunderstood this, because the roadmap as I've read it is that eventually you end up with a Arab-supported, PLO-supported Palestinian state of sorts, where there's a board of peace helping to deliver reconstruction. Presumably that can only lead to a state being created, or is that not right?
Well, that's the idea. I think the proposal, was watered down. It seems to have initially been worded that there will be talks towards leading to a Palestinian state. What you're referring to, that's the interim authority that will rule Gaza until the Palestinian Authority is reformed and reconstituted and can take over Gaza. And there will be negotiations to lead to an eventual Palestinian state, which is really a Saudi condition and an Arab condition and a Palestinian condition. So that's been watered down to, negotiations on coexistence. Now, what Netanyahu, what he would argue is that, well, we can coexist if, his vision all along has been an economic plan for the Palestinians where, they kind of improve their economic lot and there's no need for any self-determination or a sovereign state. Obviously, that's unacceptable to the Palestinians. But, I think, the very tragic and unfortunate point here is that we're dealing with the same exact actors who kind of did their best in the 1990s to foil what was the best shot really that both sides had, and also the Palestinian leadership in the form of Yasser Arafat contributed to that as well when he balked in Camp David. So they're both very good at procrastinating. They're both very good at squirming their way out of the clauses that they don't like. Again, so I don't think anyone has really much hope for this. But I think what people in Gaza are most concerned with right now is not Palestinian statehood, is not, having their own state and their own, postage stamps and their own sort of embassies everywhere. I think they're just concerned with ending this war. 2.1 million people. According to the former Israeli army chief of staff who resigned in March, a tenth of Gaza's population, has been killed or wounded. Okay, so that's 10% of the population has been killed or wounded. And many are homeless, many are starving. And as one Gazan political scientist told me yesterday, people are just concerned with ending this nightmare.
Yeah, and whether what's that phrase? History is a nightmare from which we're trying to awake. Whether that's ever actually possible is a very different question. Sam, it's so interesting to talk to you. Thank you for joining us.